After breaking a decades-long playoff winning streak in 2023, the Twins came into the 2024 season primed to contend again for the World Series. They brought back a majority of their roster from that 2023 season, and they got off to a good start last year. According to Fangraphs, they had a 95.4% chance to make the playoffs as late as September 5th, but ended the season on a 6-16 stretch that made them miss the playoffs entirely, with two other division rivals jumping them in the standings and making the playoffs over them. Fortunately, the Twins do bring back a lot of the talent that they had on the roster last year and made a couple additions to help this team. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe to the channel. I'll be putting out the rest of these videos by opening day. Let's take a deep dive on the 2025 Minnesota Twins organization. We'll go into some team ranks right away. All of these rankings are going to be completely objective. I have my formula for these rankings in the description of the video. The Major League roster came at just about league average, 16th in the league, led by a pitching group with an 8th ranked Major League Bullpen and a 12th ranked Major League Rotation. Their lineup was just about middling as well, 14th in the league. The defense, the only thing that was below average out of this group. And a huge plus for this Minnesota Twins organization is how well they do at drafting and developing talent in their minor leagues. The 6th ranked farm system in baseball, led by the 10th ranked Major League Hitters, a trio of top 100 prospects, and a group of pitchers that's going to send a couple guys up to the majors this season. We'll go directly into the brain trust of this organization. The manager here is Rocco Baldelli. This will be his 7th season in Minnesota, a .525 winning percentage, 457 wins for him here. Front office-wise, the Twins do things a bit differently, delegating a lot of responsibilities all over the place. I'm just going to talk about the general president here, Derek Falvey, president of baseball operations and business operations. His 9th season here in Minnesota, 620 and 574, a .519 winning percentage, 4 playoff appearances in the 8 full seasons that he's been in Minnesota. Last season, the Twins finished over 500, 82 and 80, 4th in the AL Central, but 8th in the American League. So while they finished pretty far back in their division, the only team below them being the worst team in baseball history, Chicago White Sox last year, the Central was very good towards the end of the season, ended up sending 3 playoff teams in Cleveland, Kansas City, and Detroit. Their payroll last season was $130 million. This year, projected to win the American League Central at 86 and 78 by PECOTA, 5th in the American League. Their payroll did go up this offseason. Although they didn't make a lot of Major League offseason moves, a lot of their arbitration guys ended up getting more money in this offseason period. Their 2025 playoff odds at 62.9%. So definitely a tier up as we move forward in these rankings. Top 100 draft capital wise, they have a lot next season. One of the few teams with 4 picks, 13, 36, 54, and 88 in the draft. Feel very good about that, building to an already really solid farm system. Carlos Correa is your top contract here, $33.3 million for him. Pablo Lopez second at $21.8 million. The Twins extended him, and then Byron Buxton still on his extension, $15.1 million in 2025. Their last playoff appearance was that 2023 one that I mentioned. Beat the Blue Jays in the first round, would end up losing a tight series against the Houston Astros. Their park factor is 102. That's just going to be a number that goes into things like weighted runs created plus that shows how much of a hitter's or pitcher's park you play in. The Twins have the 5th biggest hitter's park in baseball at Target Field. And then finally, the organization success. Last season in AAA, not as good below 500. AA had a really rough season. Cedar Rapids Colonels in high A 67 and 63, and then their A team Fort Myers Mighty Muscles 66 and 59. My biggest season storyline for the Minnesota Twins this year is move on to 2025. I believe this is the most talented roster in the division. There's so much offensive and pitching talent on this team. I have Matt Wallner pictured there. Get 2024 out of your head. See it as a lost season. Move on to 2025 and compete for that AL Central title. Next, always the biggest question with Minnesota, can you stay healthy over the full season? Guys like Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton, Royce Lewis, Matt Wallner, all missed time for Minnesota last year, and that really hurt them down the stretch. If you can get a full season out of some of these guys, or even just more games than last year, you feel really good about the Twins going into this season. And then the starter consistency, a couple of the guys took a step back in 2025. Pablo Lopez had a bit of a hit on his ERA, but I believe he's a really solid pitcher. There's a group of 5 guys that I do really like, 2 others that are coming up through the system right now. Can they stay consistent throughout the entire year and give a full season's worth of efforts for Minnesota? A real quiet offseason for the Minnesota Twins. Every single player on this page is going to have positive projected WAR next season or had positive WAR last season. Harrison Bader is your big money addition here at $6.25 million for the Twins. Most likely going to be a bench bat and a platoon bat against left-handed pitching. He's going to play outfield for you. Ty France, 1 year, $1 million, currently slotted in as your starting first baseman. Projected just over 1 WAR next year. And then Danny Coulombe, 1 year, $3 million, came over from Baltimore, a really good season last year. He'll be a lefty reliever in this pen. In terms of subtractions, a couple big ones. Carlos Santana was very good for the Twins at first base last year. He is going over to your division rival Cleveland Guardians this year, 3 WAR in 2024. Max Kepler in Minnesota for his entire career, 1 WAR in 2024. He's headed over to Philadelphia this offseason. Caleb Thielbar, lefty out, lefty in. He's going to Chicago, 0.2 WAR in 2024. And then Giovanni Moran traded to the Red Sox this offseason. Not a lot of money spent by this organization, no long-term commitments. The Twins had plans of cutting some payroll going into the 2025 season, and they really showed that in the way that they approached this offseason. Before I go into the players in this projected lineup and bench, I'll go over some numbers really quickly. WOBA stands for weighted on base average. League average for that is 310. Think about it as a form of on base percentage, but everything is weighed differently, meaning a home run is weighed more than a triple, which is weighed more than a double, etc. Just a better form of on base percentage that does a good job at weighing outcomes. And then weighted runs created plus is the other number here. League average for that is 100. Think about it as a general offensive stat to measure productivity on that side of the ball. Every number above or below 100 is going to be the percent better or worse that you are compared to league average. So for example, Matt Wallner is projected to be 23% better than league average offensively next year, and we'll go right into him. He's one of the young guys here, one of the more underrated players in baseball in terms of a hitter profile. More of a platoon bat versus righties than anything, but man, he crushes the baseball. Projected 20 homers and 2.4 WAR this season. If you're watching this video, you know who Carlos Correa is. 28% better than league average on the projections, 20 homers, over 4 WAR next season. Just missed the cut for being top 10 at his position in projected WAR. Byron Buxton, probably know him as well. One of the best players in the game, but just cannot stay on the field. 21% better than league average on the projections, 25 homers and just under 3 WAR. Trevor Larnach, a really good season last year, 12% better than league average on the projection, 16 homers, 1.4 WAR. Another guy who's probably going to platoon a lot as an outfielder, hits righties much better. Royce Lewis, the guy in this lineup projected to be top 10 at their position or better, 26 homers, 3.2 WAR on the season for projections. Another guy who's got to stay on the field to get those numbers. Ryan Jeffers, a real solid catcher behind the plate, a really good hitter as well. Willi Castro, really a do-it-all player, can play anywhere on the field. Currently listed as the DH and projected to be just about a league average hitter. He'll bring you a lot of value defensively. Ty France projected to take a major leap forward next year after a tough 2024. And then Brooks Lee, a rookie bat here, came up and played a bit with the Twins last year. Former very high draft pick, a lot of prospect pedigree on this guy. He'll be playing second base, a switch hitter. And then on the bench, Christian Vazquez, your backup catcher, projected 1.3 WAR this season. Jose Miranda, I'm going to expect him to play a lot this year, had a really good 2024. Edouard Julien, a step back in 2024, but projected again to play a lot at second base. And then Harrison Bader, a great defensive outfielder who's not going to bring you a ton offensively, but he will be in the lineup against left-handed pitching. The Twins are a big platoon offense. A real solid top 3 here in Minnesota. Pablo Lopez projected to be one of the 30 best starting pitchers in WAR next year. 3.5 WAR, a 3.7 ERA in 192 innings. Jhoan, another really good pitcher, just under a 3.8 ERA. Projected 3 WAR next season. Bailey Ober, just wait until we get to the breakdown on Bailey Ober. He is a stud. Under a 4 ERA on the projections. Simeon Richardson came over in a trade a couple years ago for Jose Barrios. Had a good year last year. Projected 130 innings in this rotation and over 1 WAR. And then Chris Paddack, 1.2 WAR on the projections for next season. A bit of a step back, has shown signs of being a solid pitcher in the past. And then some other contributors here. Zebby Matthews we'll talk about in the prospect section. David Festa, another guy that can come in and pitch for this squad. And then Abirson Castellano. I think a really good starting pitching group here in Minnesota. One of the best back ends of the bullpen in baseball, and Jhoan, Duran, and Griffin Jacks here. Duran is disgusting, one of the best closers in the game. Cole Sands, another high leverage guy here. He is really solid. Brock Stewart, a good reliever who dealt with injuries last year and had a small sample, not great, but projected to be really good this year. Danny Kalum, the lefty here, alongside Cody Funderburk. Really solid name there. 3.85 ERA. And then Jorge Alcala, another reliever here, has been pretty good for the Twins. Louis Varland is your long guy in this pen, can start some games for you, can give you multi-innings out of the bullpen. He's projected under a 4 ERA this season. Before I dive into these player breakdowns, I'll give you some of the numbers on the screen here. All of the percentiles on the left and right side of the screen are going to be your run values, offense base running, and defense run values from Baseball Savant. They're all in percentiles compared to the rest of the league. On the card, you're going to have your wins above replacement since 2022 per 162, and then a bunch of standard stats for every player. On the Baseball Savant page, you're going to have plate discipline stats, hard hit stats, and then alongside that, you'll have defensive and base running metrics on those cards as well. So we'll start off here with Ryan Jeffers, 28 years old, pretty valuable behind the plate, a really solid hitter, 21 homers last season, 7% better than league average. Really good behind the plate at throwing runners out, but just is not a great framer or blocker, and that really hurts his defense. A guy who won't strike out very often, but just doesn't really hit the ball as hard as he has in the past. He has a good bat speed, so you could expect some of that to maybe come back in 2025. But the hard hit rates, all of the expected stats, and the squared up rate is just not very high for him. In terms of rate stats for Jeffers, he took a pretty big step back from his really solid 2023 season, an 859 OPS, 14 homers, in 130 less plate appearances. The barrel rate and hard hit rate were a lot higher for him that year. The batting run value would have been a bit higher for him as well. A guy who's definitely a plus bat behind the plate. A tough second half for him really kept down his full season stats. A 791 OPS and 14 homers in 297 plate appearances in the first half. Just a 630 in the second half, although he did still have 7 home runs. Really just wasn't getting on base in the second half, and that slugging percentage dropped by over 90 points. I'll go over Vazquez a bit quicker, a guy who's been really solid in the past, 4 years old now, but he is a much better framer than Ryan Jeffers is behind the plate. He's going to be your defensive catcher out of this group. Doesn't bring you as much offensively anymore. Still won't strike out very often though, and that can definitely be a plus for a catcher. The past 2 seasons for Vazquez, a 575 and a 598 OPS. He was a 714 in 2022, but really just not a ton to expect offensively from Vazquez behind the plate. Again, the better defensive catcher out of this group though. I think a solid catching group here in Minnesota. I do like Jeffers as a hitter, Vazquez as a defensive player. Jeffers crushes lefties, and that's definitely a plus for him because there's some guys in this lineup that don't hit lefties very well. A good catching group here in Minnesota. So Ty France currently listed by Fangraphs to be your starting first baseman, although I could see Jose Miranda taking that spot eventually. A real step back for France from the plate last year. A lot of his expected numbers very low for him. Didn't really hit the ball very hard last year. Not a guy who strikes out a lot, but he doesn't walk a lot either, and he doesn't bring you anything defensively or as a base runner. Spent last season between Seattle and Cincinnati, had an alright 2023, had a lot better on the expected stats that year, and a 703 OPS. 2022, a 774 OPS, hit the ball a lot harder that year and didn't strike out nearly as much as he did last year. Not a super high ceiling guy here in Ty France, but a guy who's gonna give you some value in terms of what he can do offensively. I think over the long term, I definitely expect Jose Miranda to take this spot. But Ty France here currently listed as the starting first baseman here on a 1-year, $1 million deal. Former top prospect of the Minnesota Twins, Brooks Lee, a switch-hitting second base shortstop combo. I would expect him to play more second base here. Got up to the majors for 50 games last year and didn't have a lot of success. 38% worse than league average as a hitter. He did do some things really well, has a really good contact bat, didn't strike out very often, didn't whiff very often, but the expected numbers and hard hit rates just aren't very good. The former number 8 overall pick in the 2022 draft, a guy who has a lot of minor league pedigree though, really solid stats last season, 51% better than league average down there, 961 OPS in 156 plate appearances at the minor league level, 8 homers. This could also be a platoon spot for Edouard Julien to get some run, but I think they really want Brooks Lee to succeed in this position. I am really hopeful for what Brooks Lee can bring. He's just been so good in the minor leagues. A solid August for him last year, 785 OPS in 15 plate appearances, a bigger sample in September, and a 501 OPS in 75 plate appearances. Got a little worse as the season went on, but I think Major League pitching was really catching up to him. I'm hopeful for Brooks Lee as the second baseman in 2025. Royce Lewis, former number 1 overall pick and the starting third baseman for your Minnesota Twins, a guy who's been really productive in the majors his entire time up, but just hasn't been able to stay on the field. 82 games last season, did take a bit of a step back offensively, but still 8% better than league average, 16 homers last year, didn't really hit the ball as hard as he has in the past, although his barrel rate number is still pretty solid, but a super valuable player since he's been up 4.3 WAR per 162 and still just 25 years old. The last 2 seasons before this for Royce, a 2023 with a 920 OPS, a 309 average, 2022 an 867 OPS. He was hitting the ball a lot harder those years. The plate discipline numbers haven't changed really as much. I wonder if the reduced hard hit rates had a bit to do with the injury because he did miss a lot of time last year. A guy who saw his first real struggle in the majors last season. I would expect Royce Lewis to bounce back this year. Hopefully he can stay on the field for an entire 162, or at least a majority of it. One of the best talents in the game offensively, just needs to be able to stay out there to produce for this team. A lot of the same here for Carlos Correa, the shortstop of your Minnesota Twins. 91st percentile in offensive run value in just 86 games last year. Incredible for him offensively last season. 155 weighted runs created plus, 385 WOBA, 14 homers in just those 86 games. Almost every baseball savant stat is in the red. Still a really solid defender and a league average base runner. He does everything really well. An interesting contract for him. He's technically under contract until the end of the 2032 season, but he has an opt-out after 2028. Crushed lefties last season as well. Just an incredible shortstop and a great long-term signing for the Twins if he can stay on the field. He had his first real tough year in 2023, just a 711 OPS that season, but he took a step back to being the Carlos Correa that we all know. 905 OPS, one of the better offensive seasons of his career over that 86-game sample. Really just did everything better last season for Minnesota compared to how he did in 2023. He got better after the All-Star break, although just 50 plate appearances, a 960 OPS. An outrageous month of June, a 1.023 OPS, 5 homers, 9 walks to 15 strikeouts that month. One of the better shortstops in the game, still only 30 years old, although he's been in the league forever. I feel really good about Carlos Correa as the shortstop this year, another guy who just needs to stay on the field to be productive. Trevor Larnach, 28-year-old outfielder who's been up in the majors for a bit and has actually been really solid in terms of production and value. 1.8 WAR per 162 since he's been up. Last season was great offensively, 21% better than league average. All of the expected stats and the hard hit rates love him. He underperformed his expected WOBA and his expected slugging last year, so we would expect those numbers to go up as well. Another guy, though, only 86 games for him last year. And something else for Larnach, a guy that really only hits righties. Just a 579 OPS against lefties last season compared to the 783 against righties. Over the large sample of his entire career, that's really been a theme for him, so he's more of a platoon bat than anything, but when he's out there against righties, he is a plus hitter. A guy who's not going to bring you a lot as a defender. He will probably DH a lot for this team, or a base runner as well. More of a bat than anything, but a really solid one in that, specifically as a platoon against right-handed pitching. A solid left field option. We'll go into some more guys that'll hit against lefties on the bench. The face of this team, the center fielder, Byron Buxton, 31 years old, one of the best players in the league. He's just gotta stay on the field, man. Fortunately for Buxton, the second most games that he's ever played in a season in his entire career last year. Unfortunately for Buxton, that only is 102. A dude who does everything on the field well, except for the strikeout and walk numbers. The plate discipline for him isn't great, but look at the expected numbers on the screen for him. Just outrageous. All of the hard hit stuff is great. A great defender, a great base runner. He crushes left-handed pitching. The Twins went really conservative with him in 2023, only allowing him to DH, but his offense took a huge step back. 732 OPS that year. This season, actually got more games, played center field in 859 OPS to finish the year, took all of his metrics a step up in 2024, got better as the season went on to a 926 OPS in the second half. Another fun fact about Byron Buxton, not even a Twins fan, but have a flag of him in my room. One of the premier hitters in our game, but he's just got to stay on the field to be the best version of himself. Really unfortunate for him because I really do think it's a Hall of Fame talent in a body that just gets injured too often, has only played 100 games twice in a season in his entire career. One of the better players in baseball, just doesn't get out there. I would expect somewhere around 100 to 110 games from him this season. If you don't watch Twins games, this is probably the best hitter that you've never heard of before in Matt Wallner. 27 years old, 55% better than league average as a hitter last season, 13 homers, just 75 games for him. Look at all of the hard hit stats on his Baseball Savant page. Top 10th percentile in baseball in barrel rate, average exit velocity, hard hit rate, bat speed. He just crushes the baseball. One of the sweetest swings in the game. Another one of this crew that just has to stay on the field. Very similar to Larnach, really only hits right-handed pitching. His stats against lefties are really tough. A guy who hasn't been able to consistently stay on the field due to injuries and obviously the performance against lefties. If we can get a healthy 162 out of Wallner, that would probably turn into about 120, 130 games of him playing against righties every day. I think we might be talking about one of the best offensive players in baseball, a sweet left-handed swing, a great hitter. One of the best arms in baseball. He's not going to bring you a ton in terms of range, but he can be out there to throw runners out. Solid in sprint speed as well. A guy who does a lot of things well in the outfield. Matt Wallner, one of the best hitters that you've never heard of if you don't watch Twins games. And then finally, currently listed at the DH here is Willi Castro, a switch hitter, 27 years old. Been really valuable actually for the past 3 seasons. 2.6 WAR per 162. 158 last year, so he was one of the few guys that was out there every single day. Really positive in terms of range and arm strength, and a really solid base runner in terms of sprint speed as well, although he does get thrown out on the base paths a decent amount. The offense was in the upper half of baseball last year, although the expected stats aren't great. Not really a top end of the lineup guy, but just someone you can throw out there every single day. Came over from Detroit a couple years ago. Last season for Willi, 56 games at short, 40 at second, 34 in left field, 30 in center field, and 27 at third base. A true utility player in this game, and that is so valuable for the Twins to have, especially with all of the injuries that they dealt with last year. A really solid utility player in Willi Castro, and somebody who is so incredibly valuable to this organization. On the bench, 3 guys that I do expect to play a lot here for the Twins. Jose Miranda, 26 years old, was really good offensively last season. 15% better than league average. 9 homers in 121 games. Hit 284 and gets on base a decent amount. Just 26 years old. I would expect him to be the long-term first baseman here in Minnesota. Eddie Julien, really a tale of 2 seasons for him. Last year was a big struggle offensively. He was very valuable in 2023 though, still only 25 years old. One of the more frustrating players to watch sometimes because he just does not swing the bat. One of the lowest swing rates in Major League Baseball. He does have an incredible eye. He's going to walk a lot, but he just doesn't swing very often, although he is a really solid hitter. He'll most likely slot in at second base against right-handed pitching. And then Harrison Bader, I mentioned, a really good outfielder. Didn't give a ton offensively, but some counting stats last year. 143 games for him with the Mets. A guy who can play defense, steal some bags, and play a great center field. I would expect him to get a lot of run here. A team that really likes to platoon their guys. Miranda and Bader will play almost every single day against left-handed pitching. So a real solid lineup for the Twins. One of the big concerns here is the injuries, but outside of that, all the talent in the world to be one of the best lineups in the game. I really like this Minnesota Twins lineup going forward. You just got to stay on the field as much as possible. Going into the pitching side of this video, I'll go over some of the numbers again really quick. On the right side is going to be run values again by Baseball Savant. Pitching run value, fastball, breaking, and off speed. Your pitch usages and miles per hour will be in the bottom left here. And then Baseball Savant's going to cover all the same things, some expected numbers, some hard hit rates, and then your plate discipline against stats, the strikeout and walk stuff. And then on the card is going to be Stuff Plus and Location Plus, 2 models built by Eno Saris at Fangraphs that really are a measure of how good your stuff is compared to league average and location is compared to league average. 100 is going to be league average for that stat. Same with weighted runs created plus. Again, below or under is going to be the percent better or worse that you are compared to league average. And then finally, FIP on the card is going to be fielding independent pitching. more of a projector for ERA than anything. So if a guy is a lower FIP than an ERA, you would expect that ERA to come down over the season. And we'll go into the ace of the staff here. Pablo Lopez, 29 years old, a 4.08 ERA last year, but a 3.65 FIP. So you would expect all those numbers to come down. The expected ERA also is lower than that ERA. Really good at generating chases and not walking guys. Will give up hard contact here and there. A really good fastball for him. The stuff isn't great, but he's really good at locating his pitches. Really just been a consistent one for the Twins since he came over from Miami. A 4.08 ERA this season, a 3.66 in 2023, a 2022 year with a 3.85 ERA, over 180 innings all three of those seasons. In 2024, the breaking pitches took a huge step back, 94th percentile in run value in 23, in 24 just 11th percentile. I think that's where Pablo can really pick up compared to what he's done in the past. 29 years old still, so still really young for an ace. The Twins extended him, and for good reason. A real solid number one here in Minnesota. Jhoan might be the highest potential guy out of this entire group. 28 years old. The expected numbers really like him. Really good stuff, really good location last year. Still the FIP lower than the ERA. You would expect that number to come down. The fastball for him was great last season, 94th percentile in run value. Not a ground ball pitcher really by any means. He will give up some hard contact, that barrel rate's low, but again, doesn't walk a ton of guys and gets some strikeouts. Took a big step forward as a pitcher last year after a tough 2023, a 4.51 ERA and 161 innings, although a lot of the Savant stats are around the same. His breaking pitches really took a step forward in 2024. They were second in run value percentile in 2023, all the way up to 34th percentile in 2024. So while they weren't great, they weren't as big of a negative last season, and that really helped his fastball out. 28 years old, is starting to build a track record as a really good pitcher. 135 innings last year. You would like to see him give a little more. But again, maybe the highest potential guy here because his fastball is so good. If he can develop those breaking pitches just a little bit more, you really see the high-end talent show up for him. Every once in a while in this series, there's been a guy that has really caught my eye with something on the Savant page. Bailey Ober has the best off-speed run value in baseball. I did not expect that, and look at the rest of the Savant page there for him. The only two things that he's not really good at outside of the barrel rate, which is just a bit below league average, is the fastball velo and the ground ball rate. Outside of that, upper percentile in K rate, walk rate, whiff rate, chase rate, average exit velocity, all of that. 91st percentile in pitching run value for him last year, above average with the breaking pitches. The fastballs weren't as good, but again, not very high in the fastball velo. A really tough couple starts at the start of the season last year really hurt his ERA. Outside of that, he was really good the rest of the year. Last three seasons for him, under a 4 ERA, all three of them. 3.43 in 2023, a 3.21 in 2022. The fastball was 83rd percentile in run value in 2023, so if he can go back to that, this ends up being one of the better pitchers in the entire game. Really an under-the-radar pitcher. Have to mention with him, he's 6'9", 260 pounds as well, so a really menacing presence on the mound. I was not familiar with your game, Bailey Ober, but a really solid 3-starter for Minnesota to have. Simeon Woods Richardson here, 24 years old, brought over in the Jose Barrios trade a couple seasons ago. Really good breaking pitches for him last year. The fastball was also very good. The changeup just really got touched up last year, and that resulted in a lot of hard contact. The Baseball Savant numbers are great for him, although the expected ERA is not terrible. It's about league average. Doesn't give up a ton of hard contact in general. The hard hit rate is pretty low, but doesn't get a lot of strikeouts and still walked a decent amount of guys last season. The location is much better than the stuff for him. He's never been a big stuff guy. 133.2 innings for him last year. Only 9.2 innings in the majors for Woods Richardson before last season. Not great results. Last year was his first year of major league run. Really got roughed up in the second half of the season. A 5.23 ERA post All-Star break. Don't know how I feel about Woods Richardson long term, but if anything, could be a good innings guy out of this rotation. Not a lot of great stats in terms of strikeouts, but he had a solid year last year. I would expect him to take a jump forward. Still only 24 years old, figuring out how to pitch at the major league level. And then we'll go to Chris Paddack, a guy who's been around for the while in the majors as well. 113 on the location plus. Again, another guy who doesn't have great stuff. Really got hurt by batted ball luck last year. 4.19 FIP compared to a 4.99 ERA. Although the expected ERA and expected batting average numbers don't really like him as much either. Another one in this rotation that doesn't walk a ton of guys, although Paddack will give up a lot more hard contact. The fastball for him was really solid last year. The breaking and off-speed pitches got hit pretty bad. Coming back from an injury last season, so didn't pitch the entire year, 88.1 innings, only threw 5 innings in 2023 and 22.1 in 2022, so not a big sample recently out of Paddack. It's kind of a clean slate year for him. He hasn't had a full run in the majors for a pretty long time now, since 2021. I think a good bounce back starter for this Twins team to have. The fastball velo has gone down pretty consistently the past couple of years. His really short stint in 2023 was up to 95.5. Last year down to 93.3. His last full year in 21, it was at 94.8. That might be something to monitor for Paddack over a bigger sample. I think a pretty good 5 starter though. Paddack can learn how to use that lower velocity and still be a solid pitcher, and not a terrible 5 to have, although this could be an area where we see a guy like Zebby Matthews or Festa come in and take over a lot of the innings towards the end of the season. An incredible back end of the bullpen here. Jhoan Duran, 27 years old, strikes out about 30% of the guys that he sees. The FIP at 285. Stuff is 123, 23% better than league average stuff as a reliever. He's going to throw that fastball about 41% of the time. The splinker, the splitter, 31% of the time at 97 miles an hour. Last year was his first year really having a tough ERA, 3.64. The 2 years before that, 2.45 and 1.86. All of the numbers on Savant are still really good for him. He's 100th percentile in fastball velo as well. I expect a better season out of Duran compared to last year. Just gave up too many homers last year. Still one of the better closers in the entire game. And then Griffin Jack's a real underrated reliever here, 34.4% on the strikeout rate, a 1.94 FIP last year in 71 innings. Both the stuff and location are well above league average for him. Gets a ton of strikeouts, doesn't walk a lot of guys. The only thing that he's not great at is limiting hard contact. The barrel rate, hard hit rate, and average exit velocity are the only things on his Savant page not over the 89th percentile in baseball. And then Cole Sands, another high leverage guy here, a 3.28 ERA, but a 2.63 FIP last year. The stuff and location both above league average. A guy who throws 5 pitches. The fastball was great last year in the 90th percentile for him. Not as good as these other 2 guys, but does a lot of things really well. Also doesn't walk a ton of guys, gets a lot of strikeouts, generates a lot of chases. The expected numbers are all really good for him. Just a real solid back end of this bullpen for Minnesota. Going into the rest of this bullpen, we'll start with Brock Stewart. Been a really solid pitcher, 2023, 0.65 ERA in 27 innings. Last year, just 15 and a 5.17 ERA, although all the expected numbers like him a lot more. Danny Kalum, a lefty in this bullpen, really good year with Baltimore last season, a 2.12 ERA, just about 30 innings for him. Mostly a cutter sweeper guy. He's not going to throw super hard, but does really good at getting guys out. Jorge Alcala, a 3.24 ERA. The FIP didn't like him as much last year, though. The strikeout rate, pretty solid for him. Does walk a lot of guys. Way up there in fastball velo for Alcala, 97th percentile in baseball. The expected ERA and expected batting average are both top 12th percentile in baseball. Doesn't give up a lot of ground balls, but doesn't give up a lot of hard contact either. Cody Funderburk, the other lefty in this pen, not great numbers last year. In 2023, 12 innings, a 0.75 ERA. Gets a lot of ground balls, doesn't give up a lot of hard contact, but doesn't get a lot of strikeouts or limits walks very well. Doesn't get a lot of chases on his pitches. His whiff rate is about league average. The expected numbers didn't really like him as much either. Louis Varland, a guy I was really high on going into last year. A decent 2 years before this, a 3.81 ERA in 22 and 26 innings, 4.63 in 2023. Just really took a step back last year. Didn't get many strikeouts, didn't walk a lot of guys, but just gave up too much hard contact. I think this is an area where the Twins could definitely add a guy or 2 at the deadline if they get off to a good start. I do really like the back end of the bullpen, though, to go along with a solid starting rotation here in Minnesota. We'll go into a loaded group of prospects here for Minnesota. 2 top 20 guys, 3 top 50. Number 5 in the top 100 is going to be Walker Jenkins, just 19 years old, already in AA, 39% better than league average as a hitter throughout all levels last year. He was the 5th pick in the 2023 draft, and he's already moving super fast as a high school bat. 65 on the Baseball America grade. The hit, power, field tools are all well above average. A good runner and a good arm as well. Most likely projects as a corner outfielder, but the bat is just incredible. It's been good at every step of the way for him. Really excited to see a full season out of Walker Jenkins. I would expect him to be up sooner rather than later. Emmanuel Rodriguez, maybe my favorite prospect in baseball, one of the more interesting guys to a unicorn prospect in the fact that he does not swing at pitches very often at all. Very similar to Edouard Julien. I promise you there will be an Emmanuel Rodriguez video coming out very soon after I'm done with this series. Got up to AAA last year, 84% better than league average, 9 homers, 460 WOBA last year. The power tool is crazy, 70 on that grade, 55 hit tool, 55 run, 55 arm, a solid fielder with really highlight power, an incredible prospect in Emmanuel Rodriguez. And then one I wasn't as familiar with before, Willi Castro, a second base / third base guy who does play some shortstop as well. 58% better than league average last year, got up to AA, 22 years old. The Twins' second round pick in 2023 out of Arizona State. Really good tools across the board. The arm, the only thing under 50 there. A good hit tool for him. 3 top 50 prospects for the Minnesota Twins farm system. That is definitely a huge strength for him. Going into some more notable infield prospects here for Minnesota, the number 5 prospect in this system, Keaschall Culpepper, 55 on the hit tool, 55 on the run tool, a really good defender, a high floor prospect, 22 years old in AA. Spent time between A and high A last season, not great in high A, but a really small sample for him. The Twins' first round pick in 2024 at number 21 overall. Let's see a full season of Keaschall Culpepper this year. Brandon Winnicor, the number 6 prospect in the Twins system, got up to A-ball last season, 20 years old. He was a 3rd round pick in 2023 out of high school. Really good on the power, running, and arm tools. The hit tool does need a bit of development. With the Mighty Muscles last year, 14 homers in 94 games, but just a 761 OPS, struck out 115 times in those 94 games. Billy Amick, drafted out of Tennessee last season, 22 years old, the number 12 prospect. Average tools across the board for him, but he's really hit at every step of the way. Really good numbers in the minors for the Twins last year in a really small sample. Diego Cartaya, DFA'd by the Dodgers. The Twins ended up picking him up, and he slots in as their number 21 prospect. A guy who's really struggled to hit in the minor leagues, but the power is there, and he can be an above-average defensive prospect. Got up to AAA. I would expect to see him in the majors this year. And then Peyton Eales, 25 years old, a 5'5" hitter, second base, got up to AAA last year, 17 prospect in the system. He has hit every step of the way for the Twins. A guy they signed from Indie Ball for $500. I would check out the Foolish Bailey video on him because he does an incredible job at breaking down his story. An incredible hitter and a guy that I do expect to be up to the majors at some point. 25 years old, 5'5", not super projectable, but a guy that has hit everywhere he's been. The outfield prospects take a bit of a step back, although that's the case for a lot of organizations. Eduardo Beltre is your highest outfield prospect, number 14 on their board. 18 years old in the DSL last year. Really good tools for him, had good numbers in the minors. Ricardo Olivar, another outfielder, 23 years old, the number 16 prospect for the Twins. A 60 hit tool. The rest of the tools are average or below average. Listed as a catcher / outfielder. He's a guy who's been catching a lot, but I think is going to end up being an outfield bat over that. 2 teams in 2024, high A and double A with the Twins at 822 OPS, 12 homers in 100 games. Calais Rosario left unprotected in the Rule 5 draft. Nobody ended up picking him up, so he goes back to the Twins, 22 years old in high A. Some good tools, just really struggles with the hitting. That led to a lot of strikeouts in the minors for him. Deshaun Kiersey, the number 21 prospect for the Twins. Good numbers in the minors for a long time, but the Twins haven't given him much of a run at the major league level. He did get up to the majors last year and did some things really well. I would expect him to be up with the team at some point. If anything, he can be a platoon bat against lefties. 80 run tool for him, so he's one of the better runners in the minor leagues. That's something to keep in mind. And then Yasser Mercedes, 20 years old, got up to A-ball last year, the number 25 prospect, a 60 power and 60 arm. The fielding and running are average to above average, just needs to develop that hit tool a little bit more to end up being one of these top prospects. And then these pitchers, Zebby Matthews will definitely be up with the Twins this year. 24 years old, did get up to the majors last year, their number 4 prospect. A really big pitch mix for him, 3 above average pitches in the fastball, slider, and cutter. The control, a 70 grade. 37 innings for the Twins last year in the majors to a 6.69 ERA, although the minor league stats are really solid for him. Last season, a 2.60 ERA in 18 games, 17 starts. Maybe the craziest number I've seen in this entire series, 114 strikeouts to just 7 walks over those 3 levels. Just crazy control stats. A lot more of the same in 2023, 112 strikeouts to just 15 walks. He's been good at every step of the way. I would expect him to be good in the majors. Connor Prelip, a second-round pick in 2022. Former high school player of the year in Wisconsin, 23 years old, got up to high A, pitched at Alabama, 2 really good pitches in the fastball and the slider. Changeup really good as well, could use some development. Number 7 prospect in the system. The performance has never been an issue for him. He's just really struggled with injuries. A total of 30 innings pitched in his entire minor league career. A really plus pitcher that just needs to work on figuring out those injury issues to stay on the field. Marco Raya got up to Double-A last year on the 40-man roster for the Twins, the number 9 prospect. A couple really solid pitches, the fastball, slider, and changeup all above a 50, the cutter at a 60 grade. Good control for him. A 4.05 on the ERA last year, a 3.88 on the FIP, 9.49 strikeouts per 9. He does have a bit of a walk issue, 4.05 walks per 9 to go along with that. 97.2 innings last year, all starts for him. Charlie Soto, the 34th overall pick in the 2023 draft, a guy who I was really high on as a prospect, got 74 innings last year in A-ball, just 18 years old, a 5.23 ERA, but just a 3.88 FIP, 10.58 strikeouts per 9 for him. Real solid changeup and slider, could develop that fastball a bit more and could work on the control, but I think a really solid long-term prospect to watch. And then Dasan Hill, a 2024 draftee for the Twins. He's their number 15 prospect already, has yet to pitch in the minors, came up a little slow last year. Fastball and curveball, both 55 grades, the slider at a 60. Needs to develop that changeup a bit more, but 3+ pitches for him. The control does need work, but again, another really solid long-term developmental prospect as a pitcher for the Twins. And that'll bring us into this projected 2028 lineup by Baseball America. A lot of the same mixed with a lot of these top prospects coming up through the system. Some guys already on the Major League roster in Ryan Jeffers and Royce Lewis. I will mention Royce Lewis has never played first base before, and they have him here long term. I could definitely see that, as he's definitely got the build of a corner infielder, and he has the bat to play there. He would definitely be a high upside defensive guy at first base as well, just because of the fact that he came up as a shortstop. He's played center field before, very similar to Cody Bellinger in that area. Luke Keaschall they have at second base. Brooks Lee, 27 years old, they have transitioning over to third base. I could definitely see that, especially if Royce moves to first. Carlos Correa, they still have here long term. I definitely do think that's going to happen. I like the trajectory I saw from Correa last year. Walker Jenkins, they have in the majors by 23. I 100% agree with that. He's hit his way through the minors so quickly already. Emmanuel Rodriguez, the long-term center fielder, he does have a bit of a defensive question here and there, but I think he is a center fielder long-term. I love Emmanuel Rodriguez. Matt Wallner as a corner outfielder, you were kind of hoping that he can be a DH just because he's not great in the defensive department. But if Byron Buxton is here at 34 still DHing, you could take Matt Wallner in the outfield. I think this is a lineup that you can absolutely dream on if you're the Minnesota Twins. This organization has done such a good job at developing position player prospects. So many of the guys that are on their roster or have been on their roster in the past couple of years came up through their system. A really good projected 2028 lineup for the Minnesota Twins. And then another pretty solid mix of current guys and prospects here in the projected 2028 rotation and closer list by Baseball America. Pablo Lopez and Bailey Ober they still have in this rotation alongside Simeon, Woods, Richardson. Zebby Matthews and Connor Prelip, the two prospects I talked about, I could definitely see Connor Prelip being here. He's just got to work through those injury issues and find a way to stay on the field. Zebby Matthews, I think his control is just too good to not be a high floor major league starter. Interestingly, they have Marco Raya as the closer. I'm not really sure why they don't have Duran here. I could definitely see Duran being here for a pretty long time, but if the Twins aren't willing to pay him, I think Marco Raya becomes a long-term option as a reliever. Definitely has some pretty solid stuff, and I think he could easily make this transition. Another pretty good projected rotation for the Twins. Interested to see if Prelip and Matthews can make that leap to the major leagues, and if Woods Richardson could see his ceiling as just a 5-starter, but Ober and Lopez I do really like at the top of this rotation. And then just some final thoughts on the Minnesota Twins for the 2025 season. I have really high hopes for what this group can do this year. Not much in terms of what they did this offseason. They didn't bring in a ton of guys. They're really going to rely on the base that they set for themselves here, and I completely agree with that. Although I do think there are definitely some spots that can be filled up. I think they can address that towards the trade deadline, maybe a reliever, maybe a starter in this rotation if Zebby doesn't really turn out to be one of the guys this year, or if Festa doesn't develop into a major league starter this quickly. I love the lineup. It's obviously a lot of injury questions, and that's just really tough for the Twins. If you got a full 162 out of every guy in this lineup, I think this might be the best lineup in baseball. But that's obviously just not going to happen. Guys like Buxton and Wallner just aren't going to play 162 games because of injuries or platoon things. I'm hoping some guys like Correa and maybe Larnach can stay out there for a long term. And then hopefully some of these younger position player prospects or younger guys that are already on the roster can keep developing and keep becoming really solid hitters at the major league level. Guys like Jose Miranda and Edouard Julien. And then alongside that, maybe being supplemented by guys like Emmanuel Rodriguez or maybe Willi Castro this season coming through their system. I really believe in this lineup as long as it's healthy. That's just the big question for this team. Really like the rotation. Their top three is one of the best in the league. You can say that about the bullpen as well, maybe adding in Brock Stewart there. So 3 really solid guys in the rotation and the bullpen. Couple questions on Woods, Richardson, and Paddack. Can they be really good for the long term? And then a couple other question marks in this bullpen as well. Guys like Varland and Funderburk just haven't had really good major league results. What can they do this season? And then not to mention, finally, you play in a pretty solid division now. Detroit, Cleveland, and Kansas City are all really good teams. You'll get your wins against the White Sox, no questions asked. But how do you fare in division against those top 3 teams? I think that's really important for the Twins, something that they didn't do the best job at this year, and that really hurt them down the stretch. I think I do have Minnesota going over their win total and being the best team in this division. I haven't made my final decision on what I want for my season projections yet, although Cleveland and Kansas City I do think are going to be really tough competition for them and can definitely make the playoffs as well. I'm high on the Minnesota Twins this year. So thank you guys for listening to this. If you're still here, please subscribe to the channel, like the video. I'll be putting out the rest of these by opening day. This was a breakdown of the 2025 Minnesota Twins organization.